The windshield wipers couldn't keep up with the snow that night. I watched Ryan's taillights disappear into the blizzard as I stood pumping gas at that lonely station on Route 89, my hands already numb from the cold. He'd told me to hurry up, that we were late for his mother's dinner party, but when I turned around after paying, our car was gone. Just tire tracks filling rapidly with snow and the sound of wind howling through the mountains. That was the moment I realized my husband had actually left me stranded in what would become Vermont's worst blizzard in 20 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 5 years later, when James pulled up in my emerald green Lamborghini Huracan to that same gas station where Ryan was now working the night shift, the look on my ex-husband's face was worth every frozen tear I'd shed that December night. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began. Back to when I was still Claire Caldwell, small-town teacher who believed love meant accepting less than you deserved. The trouble started long before that blizzard, though. I was too naive to see the signs. Ryan and I had been married for 3 years, living in his childhood home in Burlington, Vermont, while we saved money for our own place. At least, that's what I thought we were doing. What I didn't know was that every dollar I contributed to our joint savings account was being quietly transferred to a separate account that only Ryan could access. I found this out later, much later, when I was finally brave enough to look at bank statements that had been mysteriously redirected to his office address. The Caldwell family had never warmed to me, and Patricia Caldwell, Ryan's mother, made no effort to hide her disappointment in her son's choice of wife. During Sunday dinners at their sprawling colonial house, she would regale us with stories of Vanessa Sterling, Ryan's high school girlfriend, who had gone on to become a successful real estate developer in Boston. Vanessa this, Vanessa that. How she'd just closed another $1 million deal. How she looked absolutely radiant at her cousin's wedding. How she'd asked about Ryan during her last visit home. I taught 3rd grade at Burlington Elementary, a job I loved but one that paid barely enough to cover my student loans and contribute to our household expenses. Patricia never missed an opportunity to remind me that teaching was a noble profession, but hardly a lucrative one. During one particularly uncomfortable dinner, she'd looked directly at me while discussing a newspaper article about teacher salaries, commenting that it was such a shame when talented young people settled for careers with no real growth potential. Ryan had sat silently, mechanically cutting his pot roast, never once defending my choice or acknowledging the passion I brought to my work. The signs of emotional distance had been building for months before that terrible night. Ryan started working longer hours at the insurance company, claiming that claims adjusters were overwhelmed with the early winter storm damage. He'd come home exhausted, barely speaking during dinner, falling asleep on the couch while I graded papers at the kitchen table. When I suggested we plan a weekend getaway, maybe drive up to Montreal for a romantic few days, he'd shake his head and cite budget concerns, despite the fact that our savings account showed a healthy balance every time I checked. Our conversations became purely functional. Did you pay the electric bill? What time is your parent-teacher conference? Can you pick up milk on your way home? The intimate talks we used to have about our dreams, our future, our plans for children, and travel and the life we wanted to build together had evaporated like morning mist. When I tried to bring up my concerns, Ryan would dismiss them with phrases like, "You're overthinking things," or "We're just going through a rough patch," or "Not everyone needs to talk about feelings all the time, Claire." I started noticing small changes in his appearance and habits. New cologne that smelled expensive and unfamiliar. A sudden interest in working out. Something he'd never cared about during our courtship. Phone calls that he'd take in the garage or outside, always, claiming they were work-related. Text messages that made him smile in ways that seemed foreign to me, followed immediately by his phone screen being flipped face down on whatever surface he'd placed it on. The night of the blizzard, we were supposed to attend Patricia's monthly dinner party, a tradition she'd maintained for decades where she invited prominent Burlington families to discuss community affairs and social events. I'd been dreading it for weeks, knowing that these gatherings always left me feeling inadequate and out of place among the wives of doctors, lawyers, and business owners who could afford designer clothes and professional manicures. I'd spent my modest teacher's salary on a new dress, a simple but elegant navy piece that I'd hoped would help me fit in better. The weather forecast had been ominous all day. The meteorologists were calling for significant snowfall, possibly 8 to 12 inches, with winds gusting up to 40 miles per hour. I'd suggested to Ryan that morning that we should consider staying home, that driving in those conditions seemed dangerous, especially since Patricia's house was a 30-minute drive through winding mountain roads. He'd dismissed my concerns with an irritated wave of his hand, telling me that his mother would be disappointed if we didn't show up, that she'd been planning this dinner for weeks. As we prepared to leave that evening, the snow was already beginning to fall more heavily than the forecast had predicted. I bundled up in my warmest coat, gloves, and boots, while Ryan seemed oddly energetic, almost excited about the evening ahead. He spent extra time styling his hair and even applied that new cologne I'd noticed. When I commented that he seemed unusually enthusiastic about his mother's dinner party, he'd shrugged and said he was looking forward to seeing some old friends who would be attending. The drive started normally enough, with Ryan navigating the increasingly slippery roads with careful attention. But as we got further from town, the snow began falling with an intensity that transformed the familiar landscape into something alien and threatening. The wind picked up dramatically, creating whiteout conditions that made it nearly impossible to see beyond our headlights. I gripped the door handle as our car slid slightly on a curve, my heart pounding as Ryan corrected our trajectory. When we spotted the gas station, a bright oasis in the storm about halfway to Patricia's house, I suggested we should fill up the tank just in case we encountered any problems. Ryan agreed, pulling up to the pumps with visible relief. The station was one of those older establishments with a small convenience store attached, the kind of place that had probably been serving travelers on Route 89 for decades. The wind was howling so fiercely that it took all my strength to push open the car door. I remember fumbling with the gas cap, my hands already stiff from the cold despite my gloves. The fuel pump seemed to take forever, and I kept glancing toward the warm light of the convenience store, wondering if I should grab some hot coffee for the rest of our journey. The attendant inside waved at me through the window, an elderly man who looked concerned about anyone being out in such weather. I waved back, feeling grateful for the small human connection in the midst of the storm. When the tank was finally full, I hurried inside to pay, stamping my feet to shake off the snow that had accumulated on my boots during the few minutes I'd been outside. The attendant, whose name tag read Frank, asked if we were local and whether we really needed to be traveling in such conditions. I explained about the dinner party, and he shook his head with the wisdom of someone who'd seen too many storms come and go in the mountains. Frank told me that the Weather Service had just upgraded their forecast, that the storm was intensifying beyond what they'd originally predicted. He suggested that anyone who didn't absolutely need to be on the roads should find somewhere safe to wait it out. His words sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. I thanked him for the warning and purchased 2 cups of coffee, thinking that the caffeine and warmth would help Ryan stay alert for the remainder of our journey. When I pushed through the glass doors back into the storm, the coffee cups warming, my hands through their cardboard sleeves, I looked toward where our car had been parked just minutes before. At first I thought I was confused by the swirling snow, that perhaps I was looking in the wrong direction. But as I walked to the exact spot where we'd been parked, where I could still see the tire impressions rapidly filling with fresh snow, the terrible reality became clear. Ryan had left without me. I stood there for several long moments, the wind whipping my hair across my face, the coffee cups growing cold in my hands, trying to process what had happened. Surely there was some explanation. Maybe he'd moved the car to a different pump, or perhaps he'd driven around to the side of the building to get out of the wind. I walked the entire perimeter of the gas station, calling his name, my voice barely audible above the storm. But our car was nowhere to be found. Back inside the convenience store, Frank took one look at my face and immediately understood that something was wrong. When I explained that my husband had apparently left without me, his expression shifted from concern to anger. In all his years working at that station, he said, he'd never seen anything like it. He offered to let me use the store's phone to call Ryan, and I dialed his cell number with shaking fingers. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I hung up and tried again. This time it went straight to voicemail, as if he'd seen my number and deliberately declined the call. I left a message, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable, asking him to please come back and get me, that I was worried about his safety driving in the storm. I called 3 more times over the next hour, each call going directly to voicemail, each message becoming progressively more desperate. Frank insisted that I stay in the store where it was warm, and he called his wife to let her know he might be late getting home due to the weather and a stranded customer. He made me a fresh cup of coffee and shared his dinner, a homemade sandwich, that his wife had packed for him. As the hours passed and the storm intensified, he told me stories about other travelers he'd helped over the years, people who'd been caught off guard by mountain weather or mechanical problems. It was Frank who finally suggested that perhaps my husband's abandonment wasn't as accidental as I wanted to believe. He'd seen Ryan through the store window while I was pumping gas, noticed that he'd been texting on his phone and seemed agitated about something. Frank had assumed it was work-related stress, but now he wondered if there might have been more to Ryan's mood than weather concerns. The roads became completely impassable around midnight, and Frank made the decision to close the station and wait out the storm. He'd called his wife again, explaining the situation, and she'd insisted that he bring me to their house rather than leave me stranded. I tried to protest, not wanting to impose on strangers, but Frank wouldn't hear of it. He lived only 2 miles away, he said, in a house that had weathered dozens of storms over the years. Frank and his wife Helen were the kind of people who restored your faith in humanity. They welcomed me into their warm home without question, gave me dry clothes and a comfortable bed, and never once made me feel like a burden. Helen, a retired nurse, had seen enough of life to recognize the signs of a woman whose world was crumbling, and she offered gentle comfort without prying into details I wasn't ready to share. I spent 3 days with Frank and Helen while the storm raged and road crews worked to clear the mountain passes. During those long hours, as I sat by their fireplace watching snow pile up against their windows, I had time to think clearly about my marriage for the first time in months. The signs I'd been ignoring suddenly seemed impossible to dismiss. Ryan's emotional distance, his secretive behavior, his mother's obvious preference for Vanessa Sterling, and now this ultimate act of abandonment. When the roads finally reopened, and Frank insisted on driving me back to Burlington, I wasn't sure what I would find at home. Part of me hoped that Ryan would be there, frantic with worry, ready to explain that leaving me had been some terrible misunderstanding. Another part of me, the part that was growing stronger with each passing hour, suspected that I would find evidence of betrayal that would change everything. The house was empty when I arrived, but Ryan's car was in the driveway, covered with snow that indicated it had been there for some time. I let myself in through the front door, calling his name, but receiving no response. It was then that I noticed Patricia's car parked across the street, and through our living room window, I could see her sitting in the driver's seat, talking animatedly on her phone. She saw me looking and quickly ended her call, getting out of her car with the determined stride of someone who had been waiting for this confrontation. When she knocked on our front door, I answered it with a mixture of curiosity and dread. Patricia's usual veneer of polite condescension had been replaced by something that looked almost like satisfaction. She invited herself in, settling onto our couch as if she owned the place, and began speaking in the measured tones of someone who had rehearsed this conversation. Ryan was safe, she assured me, but he needed some time to think about his future. He'd been staying at her house since the night of the storm, she said, trying to work through some difficult decisions about his life and his marriage. The truth came out in carefully constructed sentences designed to wound while maintaining plausible deniability. Ryan had been in contact with Vanessa Sterling for several months, Patricia revealed. They'd been discussing business opportunities, since Vanessa was looking to expand her real estate development into Vermont markets. But their professional relationship had evolved into something more personal, something that Ryan was now forced to consider seriously. Patricia spoke about compatibility and shared ambitions, about how Ryan deserved a partner who could match his drive and contribute meaningfully to his financial future. She talked about Vanessa's success, her connections, her ability to open doors that would remain forever closed to someone with my limited background and prospects. Throughout this devastating monologue, she maintained that she had nothing against me personally, that I was a sweet girl who would certainly find happiness with someone more suited to my modest aspirations. The cruelest revelation came last. The dinner party the night of the storm had been a setup, an opportunity for Ryan and Vanessa to spend time together while I was safely out of the picture. Vanessa had driven up from Boston specifically for the evening, and when the storm provided an unexpected excuse for Ryan to leave me stranded, they'd taken advantage of the situation to have an honest conversation about their feelings for each other. I listened to Patricia's words with a strange sense of detachment, as if she were describing events that had happened to someone else. The pain was so complete, so overwhelming, that it temporarily short-circuited my ability to feel anything at all. When she finished speaking and sat back with an expression of satisfied accomplishment, I simply nodded and thanked her for her honesty. After Patricia left, I sat alone in the house that had never really felt like home, surrounded by the life I'd thought I was building with a man who had apparently been planning his exit strategy for months. The betrayal was complete and systematic, involving not just Ryan but his entire family, orchestrated with a level of calculation that left me breathless. They hadn't just wanted me gone. They'd wanted me destroyed, humiliated, left with nothing to show for 3 years of marriage except the knowledge that I'd never been valued or wanted. That night, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my entire life. I wasn't going to beg Ryan to come back, wasn't going to fight for a marriage that had been a lie from the beginning. Instead, I was going to disappear so completely that when he finally realized what he'd lost, I would be beyond his reach forever. I was going to become someone so successful, so confident, so undeniably impressive that his abandonment would be revealed as the colossal mistake it truly was. I spent the next week quietly preparing for my departure, while Ryan continued staying at his mother's house, presumably working up the courage to ask for a divorce. I withdrew my half of our savings from the account he thought he controlled, canceled my name from all the joint credit cards, and arranged to have my personal belongings shipped to a storage facility in Denver, Colorado, a city I'd chosen almost at random from a list of places where the economy was booming and opportunities were plentiful. I submitted my resignation to Burlington Elementary, effective at the end of the school year, telling my principal that I'd received an opportunity too good to pass up. My students were disappointed, and several parents asked if there was anything they could do to convince me to stay, but I'd made up my mind. The life I'd built in Vermont was over, and the woman who had been abandoned at a gas station in a blizzard was about to transform into someone entirely new. On my last day in Burlington, I drove past that gas station on Route 89 where everything had changed. Frank was working, and he waved when he recognized my car. I stopped to thank him and Helen for their kindness, and to tell them that their compassion during my darkest moment had given me the strength to start over. Frank nodded with the wisdom of someone who understood that sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the catalysts for the best things that follow. As I drove west toward Denver with everything I owned packed into my car, I thought about the woman I'd been just a week before, Claire Caldwell, the small-town teacher who had accepted crumbs of affection and convinced herself it was love. That woman was gone forever, buried under the snow of a Vermont blizzard, along with her naive faith in people who had never deserved her trust. The woman heading toward Colorado was someone entirely different. She was Claire Winters, reclaiming her maiden name and her independence. She was going to build something extraordinary from the ashes of her destroyed marriage. Something so impressive that everyone who had underestimated her would be forced to acknowledge their mistake. And someday, when the time was right, she was going to return to Vermont and show them exactly who they'd thrown away. Denver welcomed me with sunshine and possibility, a stark contrast to the gray Vermont winter I'd left behind. The city sprawled before me like a promise, its skyline reaching toward snow-capped mountains that reminded me of home without carrying the weight of painful memories. I'd driven straight through, stopping only for gas and coffee. My determination to put distance between myself and my old life overriding my exhaustion. My first apartment was a studio in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, a cramped space with thin walls and questionable plumbing that cost more per month than I'd ever imagined. Paying for rent, the deposit and first month's rent consumed nearly half of the money I'd taken from our joint savings account, leaving me with enough to survive for perhaps 6 weeks if I was extremely careful with every dollar. The transition from small-town Vermont to urban Colorado was jarring in ways I hadn't anticipated. Everything moved faster here, from the traffic to the conversations to the expectations that seemed to surround every interaction. Job hunting in Denver proved to be an entirely different experience than anything I'd encountered in Burlington, where my reputation as a dedicated teacher had been enough to open doors. My teaching credentials were valid in Colorado, but the school districts I contacted were either not hiring mid-year or had waiting lists of candidates with local experience and connections. The few interviews I managed to secure were conducted by administrators who seemed skeptical of my reasons for relocating from Vermont without a specific job offer already in place. When pressed for details about my sudden move, I found myself struggling to craft explanations that sounded professional rather than personal. After 3 weeks of rejections and dwindling savings, I expanded my search beyond education. I applied for administrative positions at businesses throughout the metro area, retail jobs that offered immediate employment, and even considered waiting tables at restaurants near my apartment. The competition was fierce, and my small-town background often worked against me in a city full of candidates with urban experience and college degrees from prestigious universities. It was during this period of financial desperation that I discovered the hospitality industry, almost by accident. I'd been walking through downtown Denver, distributing resumes to any business that looked like it might need help, when I stopped at the Grand Meridian Hotel to use their restroom. The hotel was unlike anything I'd experienced in Vermont, a gleaming tower of glass and marble that catered to wealthy business travelers and tourists with unlimited expense accounts. While washing my hands in the opulent ladies' room, I overheard 2 women in expensive suits discussing a staffing crisis in their events department. One of them mentioned that their assistant coordinator had quit without notice, leaving them scrambling to manage a series of high-profile corporate events scheduled for the following month. The other woman expressed frustration about the difficulty of finding qualified candidates who understood both the administrative requirements and the client service expectations of luxury hospitality. I found myself following them out of the restroom, my heart pounding as I approached 2 strangers with the desperate hope of someone who had nothing left to lose. I introduced myself politely, explained that I couldn't help but overhear their conversation, and asked if they might consider an unconventional candidate for their open position. The women exchanged glances that seemed to communicate volumes about their skepticism, but something in my expression must have convinced them to give me a few minutes. Dr. Helen Brooks, the director of corporate events, was a woman in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. Her colleague, Amanda Richardson, managed the hotel's VIP services and had the polished appearance of someone who regularly interacted with celebrities and Fortune 500 executives. Both women exuded the confidence that came from years of success in an industry where attention to detail and crisis management were daily requirements. I explained my background in education, emphasizing the organizational skills, communication abilities, and grace under pressure that teaching had taught me. When Dr. Brooks mentioned that their events often involved coordinating complex logistics for demanding clients, I described the parent conferences, school fundraisers, and community events I'd organized in Vermont. Amanda seemed particularly interested when I mentioned my experience managing the expectations of difficult personalities, a skill that translated perfectly to handling high-maintenance hotel guests. The interview that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced in the education world. Dr. Brooks and Amanda grilled me about my ability to work under extreme pressure, my flexibility with unconventional hours, and my comfort level with clients, who expected perfection without regard for budget constraints or logistical challenges. They asked hypothetical questions about handling last-minute changes, managing multiple competing priorities, and maintaining professionalism when dealing with unreasonable demands. What surprised me most was their interest in my personal story, though I shared only the most basic details about my recent relocation from Vermont. Dr. Brooks seemed to appreciate my honesty about starting over, mentioning that the hospitality industry often attracted people who were rebuilding their lives and looking for opportunities to prove themselves. Amanda added that their most successful employees were those who understood that luxury service required a level of dedication that went beyond typical 9-to-5 expectations. They offered me the position on the spot, with a salary that was modest by Denver standards but significantly higher than what I'd earned as a teacher. More importantly, they explained that the Grand Meridian was part of a larger hospitality group with properties throughout the western United States, offering opportunities for advancement that simply didn't exist in small-town Vermont. Dr. Brooks mentioned that employees who demonstrated exceptional performance often found themselves fast-tracked into management positions at other properties. My first week at the Grand Meridian was overwhelming in the best possible way. I was thrust into the middle of planning a 3-day pharmaceutical conference that would bring 800 executives to Denver, complete with elaborate welcome, receptions, awards, banquets, and recreational activities designed to impress clients who were accustomed to luxury. My job was to coordinate with vendors, manage guest services, and ensure that every detail met the exacting standards that the hotel's reputation demanded. The learning curve was steep, but I discovered that my teaching background had prepared me for this world in unexpected ways. The patience required to explain complex concepts to third graders translated perfectly to walking demanding clients through event logistics. The crisis management skills I'd developed handling everything, from playground accidents to parent complaints, served me well when dealing with last-minute menu changes and transportation emergencies. Dr. Brooks became an unexpected mentor, taking time to explain the subtle art of luxury hospitality that went far beyond simply providing excellent service. She taught me about the psychology of high-net-worth individuals, how to anticipate needs before they were expressed, and the importance of making every interaction feel effortless, even when it required hours of behind-the-scenes preparation. Under her guidance, I began to understand that success in this industry required not just competence, but genuine intuition about human nature. The pharmaceutical conference was a resounding success, earning praise from both the clients and hotel management. My ability to remain calm under pressure, solve problems creatively, and maintain a professional demeanor even during crises caught the attention of several executives beyond my immediate supervisors. Within a month, I was being requested specifically for high-profile events, and my salary was adjusted to reflect my growing value to the organization. It was during the planning stages of a luxury automotive showcase that I first encountered Marcus Romano. Though our initial meeting was far from romantic, he was the event coordinator for Romano Luxury Experiences, a boutique company that specialized in creating exclusive experiences for ultra-wealthy clients who could afford to pay premium prices for access to unique opportunities. The automotive showcase was featuring rare and exotic cars worth millions of dollars, and Marcus's job was to ensure that every aspect of the experience reflected the sophistication that his clients expected. Marcus was unlike anyone I'd ever met, a man who moved through the world with quiet confidence and an attention to detail that bordered on obsessive. He wore impeccably tailored suits that probably cost more than I'd earned in a month as a teacher, drove a pristine BMW that he maintained with religious devotion, and spoke with the refined accent of someone who had been educated at exclusive institutions. Yet despite his obvious wealth and success, there was nothing condescending or pretentious about his manner. Our first professional interaction involved a disagreement about the security arrangements for the automotive showcase. Marcus insisted that the vintage Ferrari and Lamborghini models required specialized climate control and security measures that went beyond the hotel's standard protocols. I initially pushed back, citing budget constraints and logistical complications. But Marcus patiently explained the irreplaceable nature of the vehicles and the catastrophic liability issues that could arise from inadequate protection. What impressed me wasn't his insistence on getting his way, but the respectful manner in which he presented his arguments and his willingness to work with me to find solutions that addressed both his concerns and the hotel's limitations. He offered to personally oversee the installation of additional security equipment and to provide specialized staff who understood the unique requirements of handling million-dollar automobiles. By the end of our conversation, I found myself genuinely curious about this man who combined business acumen with obvious passion for automotive excellence. The automotive showcase exceeded everyone's expectations, drawing wealthy collectors and automotive enthusiasts from across the country. Marcus's attention to detail proved justified when several attendees expressed interest in purchasing vehicles on display, generating commissions that more than covered the additional security costs. Dr. Brooks was particularly impressed with my ability to collaborate effectively with Marcus, noting that he had a reputation for being difficult to work with, and that his approval meant significant potential for future business relationships. Over the following months, Marcus's company began booking regular events at the Grand Meridian, and I found myself working closely with him on increasingly complex projects. His clients were the kind of people who thought nothing of spending $50,000 on a weekend experience, and their expectations were correspondingly demanding. Every event required the seamless coordination of multiple moving parts, from private chefs and sommelier services to helicopter transportation and exclusive access to normally off-limits locations. Working with Marcus taught me about a world I'd never imagined, where money was simply a tool for creating experiences rather than a source of constant worry and limitation. His clients included tech entrepreneurs, entertainment industry executives, professional athletes, and inherited wealth families who measured success not by salary figures, but by the quality and exclusivity of their lifestyle choices. Observing their interactions, I began to understand the subtle social dynamics that governed relationships among the truly wealthy. Marcus himself remained something of a mystery, despite our frequent professional interactions. He never discussed his personal life, always maintained appropriate boundaries, and demonstrated the kind of understated professionalism that suggested extensive experience dealing with confidential client information. Yet I found myself looking forward to our planning meetings and feeling disappointed when events concluded and our collaboration temporarily ended. The breakthrough in our relationship came during a crisis that could have destroyed both our reputations. Marcus had arranged for a private collector to display his vintage Aston Martin collection at an exclusive event for 20 high-net-worth investors. The vehicles were worth a combined $8 million, and the insurance requirements alone had taken weeks to arrange. On the morning of the event, we discovered that the specialized transport trailer had been involved in an accident, leaving the cars stranded 200 miles away with no feasible way to reach Denver in time. While I coordinated with insurance companies and alternative transportation providers, Marcus made a series of phone calls that demonstrated the depth of his professional network. Within hours, he had arranged for individual flatbed trucks to transport each vehicle, coordinated with Colorado State Patrol for escort services, and negotiated with his client to extend the event timeline to accommodate the delays. His calm, Competence under extreme pressure was remarkable, and his willingness to absorb significant additional costs to protect his client's experience showed a level of professional integrity that was rare in any industry. The event ultimately succeeded beyond our wildest expectations, with several attendees expressing interest in commissioning similar experiences for their own social and business purposes. Marcus's client was so impressed with our crisis management that he immediately booked Romano luxury experiences for 3 additional events over the following year. Dr. Brooks promoted me to senior event coordinator, with a salary increase that finally allowed me to move from my cramped studio apartment to a 1-bedroom unit in a better neighborhood. As autumn arrived in Denver, I realized that I'd been living in Colorado for 8 months without a single conversation with anyone from my previous life in Vermont. I'd changed my phone number shortly after arriving, created new social media accounts, and deliberately avoided any contact with mutual friends who might report back to Ryan or his family. The isolation had been intentional, part of my strategy, to completely reinvent myself without the interference of people who knew the woman I used to be. The transformation was remarkable even to me. The timid teacher who had accepted emotional scraps and convinced herself they were love had been replaced by someone who confidently navigated high-stakes business relationships and commanded respect from clients accustomed to dealing only with the best. My wardrobe had evolved from department store basics to carefully selected pieces that projected competence and sophistication. My communication style had become more direct and authoritative, reflecting the confidence that came from succeeding in an environment where failure was not tolerated. Marcus began requesting my involvement in projects beyond the Grand Meridian, asking me to coordinate elements of experiences that took place at other venues throughout Colorado and neighboring states. These collaborations required me to work directly with his other vendors and service providers, expanding my professional network and exposing me to aspects of the luxury industry that most hotel employees never encountered. I found myself learning about private aviation, yacht charters, exclusive resort properties, and the complex logistics of creating seamless experiences across multiple locations. The financial rewards of this expanding role were significant, but more important was the growing recognition of my value within the industry. Marcus began introducing me to his clients as his preferred partner for complex event coordination, and several of them expressed interest in hiring me directly for their personal projects. Dr. Brooks encouraged me to consider these opportunities, explaining that the hospitality industry rewarded entrepreneurial thinking, and that building relationships with high-net-worth individuals could lead to extraordinary career opportunities. It was Marcus who first suggested that I consider starting my own consulting business, focusing on luxury experience coordination for clients who wanted access to exclusive opportunities without the hassle of handling logistics themselves. He pointed out that my combination of operational excellence, crisis management skills, and genuine understanding of client psychology was rare in the industry. More importantly, he offered to serve as my first major client, providing the steady income stream that would allow me to establish my business while building additional relationships. The idea terrified and excited me in equal measure. Starting my own business would mean leaving the security of the Grand Meridian, investing my savings in an uncertain venture, and taking responsibility for outcomes that could make or break my financial future. Yet the opportunity to build something entirely my own, to create success on my terms, rather than accepting whatever others were willing to offer, felt like the natural evolution of the journey I'd begun when I drove away from Vermont. Dr. Brooks was supportive of my entrepreneurial ambitions, offering to serve as a reference and suggesting that the Grand Meridian would be interested in contracting my services for events that required specialized coordination beyond their internal capabilities. Her endorsement carried significant weight in the industry, and she introduced me to several other hotel executives who expressed interest in working with independent coordinators who could provide flexible, high-quality services for their most demanding clients. By December, exactly 1 year after the blizzard that had changed everything, I submitted my resignation to the Grand Meridian and officially launched Winter's Luxury Experiences. My business cards featured elegant typography on cream-colored cardstock, and my initial marketing materials emphasized discretion, excellence, and personalized attention to detail. Marcus became my anchor client, providing enough consistent work to cover my basic expenses while I built relationships with additional clients. The transition from employee to entrepreneur required a complete shift in mindset. Instead of implementing someone else's vision, I was now responsible for creating experiences that exceeded the expectations of clients who could afford to demand perfection. Every project became a showcase for my capabilities, an opportunity to demonstrate the value I could provide to people who measured success by the quality of their lifestyle rather than the size of their paycheck. Marcus's confidence in my abilities proved justified when my first independent project, a private wine tasting experience for a tech entrepreneur and his investors, resulted in 2 additional bookings before the evening ended. Word spread quickly within Denver's affluent social circles that a new coordinator was available who understood how to create sophisticated experiences without the pretentious attitude that sometimes accompanied luxury service providers. As winter deepened and my business grew, I found myself thinking less frequently about the life I'd left behind in Vermont. The woman who had been abandoned at a gas station felt like a character from someone else's story, a cautionary tale about the dangers of accepting less than you deserved. The woman I'd become was building something extraordinary from nothing, creating value for clients who appreciated excellence and were willing to pay for the privilege of working with someone who understood their world. Yet late at night, when I was alone in my apartment reviewing contracts and planning logistics for upcoming events, I sometimes wondered what Ryan and his family thought about my complete disappearance from their lives. Did they assume I'd slunk back to my parents' house in defeat? Had they even noticed that I'd left Vermont entirely? The questions no longer carried the sharp pain they once had, but curiosity about their assumptions provided motivation for the empire I was building, one successful event at a time. Spring arrived in Denver with a burst of energy that mirrored the momentum building in my business. Winter's Luxury Experiences had grown from a desperate attempt at independence into a legitimate enterprise with a waiting list of potential clients. The referrals came steadily now, whispered recommendations among Colorado's elite social circles where reputation meant everything and mediocrity was never tolerated. Marcus had become more than just my anchor client. Our professional partnership had evolved into something deeper, though neither of us acknowledged the shift explicitly. He began involving me in strategic discussions about Romano Luxury Experiences, seeking my input on potential expansions and new service offerings. Our planning meetings stretched longer than necessary, often continuing over dinner at restaurants where the conversation meandered from business logistics to personal philosophies about success and fulfillment. The turning point came during a particularly complex project involving a pharmaceutical heiress who wanted to surprise her husband with a recreation of their honeymoon in the Swiss Alps, complete with authentic Swiss cuisine, alpine musicians, and even imported snow for a spring skiing experience in the Colorado mountains. The logistical challenges were staggering, requiring coordination with international vendors, specialized transportation for temperature-sensitive materials, and permits for activities that had never been attempted in the United States. Marcus and I spent 3 weeks planning every detail, working 18-hour days to ensure that nothing was left to chance. The night before the event, we were reviewing final preparations in my apartment when the conversation shifted from professional concerns to more personal territory. Marcus confessed that he'd never encountered anyone who combined operational excellence with genuine intuition about human nature the way I did. He mentioned that most people in our industry were either technically competent but emotionally detached, or empathetic but lacking the systematic thinking required for complex logistics. I found myself sharing more about my background than I'd intended, describing the teaching career that had prepared me for this work and the personal circumstances that had brought me to Colorado. Marcus listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated his genuine interest in understanding the experiences that had shaped my perspective. When I mentioned the betrayal that had ended my marriage, he simply nodded and said that sometimes the worst things that happened to us became the foundation for the best things that followed. The Swiss Alps recreation exceeded every expectation, creating an experience so authentic that the client's husband briefly believed he'd been transported back to their original honeymoon location. The success of this impossible project established my reputation as someone who could deliver miracles when other coordinators would simply declare objectives unachievable. Within days, I received inquiries from potential clients who had heard about the event through their social networks and wanted to explore equally ambitious projects. Marcus suggested that we formalize our collaboration, proposing a partnership structure that would allow us to bid on larger projects that neither of our companies could handle independently. The arrangement would preserve our individual business identities while creating opportunities to pursue clients whose requirements exceeded what either of us could deliver alone. The financial projections he presented showed potential revenues that dwarfed anything I'd imagined possible when I started my business. The partnership agreement was signed in June, marking 18 months since I'd arrived in Denver with nothing but determination and a rapidly dwindling bank account. Romano Luxury Experiences and Winters. Luxury Experiences became sister companies, sharing resources and expertise while maintaining separate profit centers and operational independence. The arrangement attracted attention throughout the industry, with several trade publications featuring articles about innovative business models in luxury hospitality. Our first major joint project involved creating a private racing experience for a group of automotive enthusiasts who wanted access to professional-grade facilities without the complications of public events or media attention. Marcus handled the vehicle procurement and track logistics while I coordinated accommodations, dining, and auxiliary activities for the participants and their families. The 3-day event generated more revenue than either of our companies had earned in any previous month, validating the partnership model we'd created. Success brought new challenges that required expanding our teams and developing more sophisticated, operational systems. I hired my first full-time employee, a recent hospitality management graduate named Sophia Chen, who demonstrated the combination of ambition and attention to detail that I'd learned to value above all other qualities. Marcus brought on additional staff to handle the growing demand for automotive and aviation experiences, creating a network of specialists who could deliver seamless service across multiple domains. The expansion required moving to larger office spaces, and Marcus suggested that we consider adjacent suites in a prestigious downtown building that catered to professional services firms. The location would project the established credibility that our growing client base expected, while the proximity would facilitate the collaboration that had become central to our most successful projects. I agreed, though the monthly rent represented a financial commitment that would have been unthinkable during my early days in Denver. My personal life had become inextricably intertwined with the business, not from necessity, but from genuine passion for the work we were creating. The clients we served were fascinating individuals who had achieved extraordinary success in their chosen fields, and their stories provided constant inspiration for someone who was building her own version of the American dream. I found myself learning from tech entrepreneurs about scalable business models, from entertainment executives about personal branding strategies, and from inherited wealth families about long-term thinking and legacy planning. Marcus and I began spending time together outside of work, initially for industry events and networking functions, but gradually for purely social activities. He introduced me to Denver's cultural scene, taking me to gallery openings where the art was created by internationally recognized artists and symphony performances where the musicians were world-class talents. These experiences expanded my understanding of sophistication beyond the operational competence I'd developed in the hospitality industry. The relationship between us remained undefined, but unmistakably deeper than professional collaboration. Marcus would bring me coffee during late planning sessions, remembering exactly how I preferred it prepared. I found myself staying late at the office when I knew he would be working, creating opportunities for conversations that had nothing to do with client requirements or project logistics. The tension was obvious to everyone around us, but neither of us seemed willing to risk the partnership by addressing it directly. The breakthrough came during a crisis that tested everything we'd built together. A client had commissioned us to coordinate a surprise wedding proposal involving a private helicopter tour of the Rocky Mountains, complete with a gourmet picnic at a remote location accessible only by aircraft. The morning of the scheduled event, we discovered that the helicopter company had double-booked their aircraft, leaving us without transportation for an experience that couldn't be postponed or relocated. Marcus spent the morning making increasingly desperate phone calls to aviation companies throughout the region, while I worked with our catering partners to modify the menu for ground-based alternatives. Every option we explored either wasn't available on short notice or couldn't deliver the intimate, exclusive atmosphere that the client had specifically requested. With 3 hours remaining before the scheduled departure time, we were facing the first complete failure in either of our company's histories. Marcus disappeared for 20 minutes, returning with a solution that demonstrated both his resourcefulness and the depth of his personal network. A friend who collected vintage aircraft had agreed to loan us his restored 1940s military transport helicopter, complete with a pilot who specialized in scenic tours for film and television productions. The aircraft was more dramatic than anything we could have arranged through commercial providers, and the pilot's Hollywood experience meant he understood how to create cinematic moments that would exceed our client's expectations. The proposal was spectacular, with the vintage helicopter providing a unique backdrop that made the experience far more memorable than our original plan would have achieved. The client was so impressed that he immediately booked us for his wedding reception, scheduled for the following autumn with a budget that represented the largest single project either of our companies had ever undertaken. More importantly, the crisis had demonstrated our ability to perform under impossible pressure, while supporting each other through professional challenges that could have destroyed less resilient partnerships. That evening, as we celebrated the successful proposal with champagne at a downtown restaurant, Marcus finally addressed the unspoken attraction that had been building between us for months. He admitted that he'd been hesitant to pursue a romantic relationship because he valued our professional partnership too highly to risk damaging it with personal complications. I confessed that I'd been having similar thoughts, torn between genuine attraction and concern about mixing business with personal emotions. The conversation continued at my apartment, where we discussed the potential risks and benefits of evolving our relationship beyond professional collaboration. Marcus emphasized that our business partnership had been built on mutual respect and shared values, suggesting that those same foundations could support a personal relationship if we approached it with the same thoughtfulness we brought to our professional decisions. I appreciated his analytical approach to what could have been a purely emotional discussion, recognizing that his systematic thinking was one of the qualities that had made our business partnership so successful. We agreed to explore a romantic relationship while maintaining clear boundaries between our personal and professional interactions. The decision felt both natural and terrifying, representing a level of vulnerability that I hadn't experienced since my marriage ended. Yet the trust we'd built through months of successful collaboration provided confidence that we could navigate whatever challenges might arise from combining business with personal emotions. The transition was surprisingly seamless, perhaps because we'd already been functioning as partners in everything but name. Marcus was attentive without being possessive, supportive without being condescending, and ambitious about our shared future without dismissing my individual goals and aspirations. He encouraged me to pursue opportunities that would advance my personal brand within the industry, even when those opportunities might require time away from our joint projects. Summer brought a steady stream of high-profile events that showcased our combined capabilities and attracted attention from potential clients throughout the Western United States. We coordinated a private concert featuring a Grammy-winning artist for a tech entrepreneur's product launch, created a medieval feast experience complete with period costumes and entertainment for a pharmaceutical executive's milestone birthday, and arranged a private shopping experience at closed luxury boutiques for an entertainment industry family's annual reunion. Each successful project generated referrals that expanded our client base and increased our reputation within exclusive social circles where word-of-mouth recommendations carried more weight than any traditional marketing could achieve. We began receiving inquiries from clients in California, Arizona, and even international prospects who had heard about our work through their social networks. The growth required developing operational systems that could maintain our quality standards while scaling to meet increased demand. Marcus proposed that we consider expanding beyond Colorado, suggesting that our model could be replicated in other markets where wealthy individuals valued exclusive experiences but lacked access to coordinators who understood their expectations. The expansion would require significant capital investment and careful market research, but the potential returns were enormous given the limited competition in most luxury markets outside of major metropolitan areas. I was intrigued by the expansion possibilities but concerned about maintaining the personal attention that had become our signature advantage. Our success had been built on intimate knowledge of our clients' preferences and the ability to anticipate their needs before they were explicitly expressed. Scaling those capabilities to multiple markets would require recruiting and training staff who could deliver the same level of service that Marcus and I provided personally. The discussion about expansion led to broader conversations about our long-term vision for the businesses we were building. Marcus revealed that his ultimate goal was to create a luxury experiences empire that could operate independently of his day-to-day involvement, providing him with the financial freedom to pursue philanthropic interests that had been secondary priorities during his career-building years. I found myself sharing dreams about using business success to support educational initiatives, particularly programs that helped young women develop the confidence and skills needed to pursue entrepreneurial opportunities. As autumn approached, marking 2 years since my arrival in Denver, I realized that the woman who had been abandoned at a gas station in Vermont felt like a character from someone else's story. The transformation hadn't been sudden or dramatic, but rather a steady evolution from someone who accepted whatever others were willing to offer to someone who created opportunities that exceeded what anyone had imagined possible. The confidence that came from succeeding in an industry where failure was visible and expensive had replaced the insecurity that had once characterized every aspect of my self-perception. Marcus began discussing marriage in hypothetical terms, exploring how a formal partnership might affect our business relationship, and whether combining our personal and professional lives completely would strengthen or complicate the empire we were building together. His approach was characteristically analytical, but underneath the logical framework was genuine emotion that made his theoretical discussions feel like actual proposals. The wedding reception we'd been planning since the helicopter proposal became a showcase for everything we'd learned about creating extraordinary experiences. The client had an unlimited budget and sophisticated tastes, requesting an event that would be remembered as the social highlight of Denver's autumn season. The logistics required coordinating with dozens of vendors, managing complex security requirements for high-profile guests, and creating atmospheric details that would transform an ordinary venue into something magical. The reception was held at a private estate in the mountains west of Denver, with 300 guests including celebrities, business leaders, and political figures whose presence required discreet security arrangements and confidentiality agreements. Marcus handled the transportation logistics, arranging for a fleet of luxury vehicles to shuttle guests from downtown Denver to the mountain location. I coordinated the catering, entertainment, and atmospheric elements that would create an unforgettable experience for attendees accustomed to exclusive events. The success of the reception generated national media attention, with several lifestyle publications featuring articles about the innovative approaches we'd used to create authentic luxury experiences. The publicity attracted inquiries from potential clients across the country, validating Marcus's belief that our model could be successfully expanded to other markets. More importantly, the project had demonstrated our ability to deliver flawless execution under the most demanding circumstances while maintaining the personal attention that distinguished our work from larger event planning companies. Standing in the estate's garden after the last guests had departed, watching Marcus coordinate the breakdown logistics with the same attention to detail he'd applied to the setup. I felt a profound sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with financial success or industry recognition. We had built something extraordinary together, creating value for clients who appreciated excellence while developing a partnership that enhanced both our professional capabilities and personal fulfillment. The woman who drove away from Vermont, with nothing but determination and a broken heart, had become someone who commanded respect in an industry where reputation was everything and mediocrity was never tolerated. Yet the most important transformation wasn't the business success or financial security, but the discovery that authentic partnership was possible when two people shared values, respected each other's capabilities, and remained committed to supporting each other's individual growth within their shared vision. The phone call that would change everything came on a Tuesday morning in November, exactly 3 years after the blizzard that had transformed my life. Marcus was reviewing acquisition proposals for luxury properties in Aspen when my assistant Sophia knocked on my office door with an expression that suggested urgent business. The caller had specifically requested to speak with me personally, identifying himself as a representative of Burlington Financial Services and mentioning that he had information about insurance settlements that might require my immediate attention. My blood went cold as I recognized the company name. Burlington Financial Services was the insurance firm where Ryan had worked as a claims adjuster, the same company that had supposedly required his long hours and late nights during the months leading up to our marriage's destruction. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 3 years, and its sudden reappearance in my carefully constructed new life felt like a violation of the protective barriers I'd built around my Colorado existence. The caller introduced himself as David Chen, a senior investigator who had been assigned to review historical claims files as part of a comprehensive audit being conducted by the State Insurance Commission. During this review, he'd discovered irregularities in several claims that had been processed by former employee Claire Caldwell. Irregularities that had resulted in improper payouts totaling nearly $200,000 over a period of 18 months. David explained that his investigation had revealed a pattern of fraudulent claims processing that appeared to have been coordinated between Ryan and several accomplices, including individuals who had submitted false damage reports and medical professionals who had provided fraudulent documentation to support inflated settlement amounts. The scheme had been sophisticated enough to avoid detection during routine audits, but the comprehensive review had revealed statistical anomalies that warranted criminal investigation. The reason for David's call was both shocking and deeply satisfying. Ryan had been arrested the previous week on charges of insurance fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. His assets had been frozen pending the outcome of criminal proceedings, and the district attorney's office was seeking restitution of the full amount that had been fraudulently obtained. During the investigation, authorities had discovered that Ryan had used some of the stolen money to finance his lifestyle with Vanessa Sterling, including the down payment on their house and the startup capital for her real estate development ventures. David's investigation had also revealed that my former husband's financial crimes had begun during our marriage, meaning that some of the money he'd stolen had been obtained while he was still legally married to me. Under Vermont law, I might be entitled to claim a portion of any assets recovered through the restitution process, particularly if I could demonstrate that I had been unaware of his criminal activities and had suffered financial harm as a result of his actions. The irony was delicious. Ryan had abandoned me because he believed Vanessa offered better financial prospects and greater social advancement opportunities. Now his pursuit of those very advantages had led to criminal behavior that would likely result in imprisonment, financial ruin, and the destruction of everything he'd schemed to obtain. The stronger, better choice that his mother had advocated for had become the catalyst for his complete downfall. David requested permission to interview me about my knowledge of Ryan's activities during our marriage, explaining that my testimony could be crucial in establishing the timeline of his criminal behavior and demonstrating the pattern of deception that had characterized his actions. He also mentioned that the investigation had uncovered evidence suggesting that Patricia Caldwell might have been aware of some aspects of her son's fraudulent activities, potentially making her liable as an accessory to his crimes. After ending the call with David, I sat in my office for several minutes processing the implications of this unexpected development. The vindication was overwhelming, but more importantly, the situation presented an opportunity that I hadn't anticipated. Ryan's arrest would undoubtedly become public knowledge in Burlington's small social circles, meaning that everyone who had witnessed my humiliation 3 years earlier would now observe his spectacular fall from grace. I shared the news with Marcus, who listened with the analytical attention he brought to all significant developments that might affect our personal or professional lives. His immediate concern was whether my involvement in the investigation might create negative publicity that could impact our business relationships, particularly with clients who valued discretion above all other considerations. We discussed strategies for managing any media attention that might result from my connection to a criminal investigation, though Marcus believed that my role as a victim, rather than a perpetrator, would likely generate sympathy rather than scandal. More intriguingly, Marcus suggested that Ryan's arrest might present an opportunity for us to expand our business into Vermont markets that we'd never previously considered. The publicity surrounding a local insurance fraud case would create awareness of white-collar crime that might make wealthy Vermont residents more receptive to working with out-of-state service providers who had no connections to potentially compromised local networks. If we positioned ourselves correctly, we might be able to establish a luxury experiences presence in New England markets that had previously seemed inaccessible. The strategic possibilities excited me almost as much as the personal vindication. Vermont's wealthy residents included successful entrepreneurs, entertainment industry figures who maintained country estates, and old money families who had been accumulating wealth for generations. These potential clients likely had sophisticated tastes and substantial budgets for exclusive experiences, but limited access to service providers who understood their expectations and could deliver the quality they demanded. Marcus proposed that we consider opening a seasonal operation in Vermont, possibly based in Manchester or Stowe, that could serve wealthy clients throughout New England during the summer and autumn months when the region attracted affluent tourists and seasonal residents. The timing would be perfect, allowing us to establish our presence while the local market was destabilized by the scandal surrounding Ryan's arrest and the subsequent investigation of Burlington Financial Services. I agreed to cooperate with David Chen's investigation, scheduling an interview for the following week that would require me to travel back to Vermont for the first time since my departure. The prospect of returning to the place where I'd been so thoroughly humiliated was both thrilling and terrifying, representing an opportunity to demonstrate how completely I'd transformed my life while potentially encountering people who remembered me only as Ryan's abandoned wife. Marcus insisted on accompanying me to Vermont, ostensibly to explore potential business opportunities, but primarily to provide emotional support during what would undoubtedly be a challenging experience. We booked a suite at the Equinox Resort in Manchester, a luxury property that would serve as our base for both the legal proceedings and our market research activities. The choice of accommodation was strategic, demonstrating our success to anyone who might observe our presence while providing the comfort and privacy we'd need during a potentially stressful visit. The flight to Vermont gave me time to reflect on the 3 years that had passed since my desperate escape from Burlington. The woman who had driven west with nothing but determination and a broken heart had been replaced by someone who commanded respect in competitive industries, had built a successful business empire, and was engaged to a man who valued her capabilities rather than tolerating her limitations. The transformation felt complete. Yet returning to the scene of my former life would test whether the confidence I'd developed was genuine or merely a performance designed to convince myself that I'd overcome the past. David Chen met us at the Vermont State Police Barracks in Montpelier, a modern facility that projected the professional competence of an organization serious about investigating white-collar crime. He was a soft-spoken man in his 40s who explained legal procedures with the patience of someone accustomed to working with witnesses who were emotionally invested in the outcomes of his investigations. His questions were thorough but respectful, focusing on my observations of Ryan's behavior during our marriage and my knowledge of his financial activities. The interview revealed details about Ryan's deception that I hadn't fully understood at the time. The long hours he'd claimed were required by his job had actually been spent coordinating with accomplices who submitted fraudulent claims that he would process with minimal scrutiny. The business trips that had occasionally taken him away from home overnight had been meetings with medical professionals who were willing to provide false documentation in exchange for percentage payments from the resulting settlements. Most shocking was David's revelation that Vanessa Sterling had been an active participant in the fraud scheme, using her real estate connections to identify properties that could be used as the basis for false damage claims. Her intimate knowledge of property values and insurance requirements had made her an invaluable partner in Ryan's criminal enterprise, explaining the financial success that had made her seem like such an attractive alternative to a small-town teacher with modest aspirations. David showed me photographs of documents that demonstrated the scope of Ryan and Vanessa's criminal activities, including bank records that revealed how they'd used fraudulent insurance proceeds to finance their lifestyle and business ventures. The evidence was overwhelming, suggesting that their prosecution would be successful and that substantial restitution would be required. My potential claim as Ryan's former spouse could result in a significant financial settlement, though David emphasized that legal proceedings might take months or years to reach final resolution. The interview concluded with David requesting that I remain available for potential testimony during Ryan's trial, which was scheduled for the following spring. He assured me that my cooperation was voluntary, but emphasized that my testimony could be crucial in demonstrating the pattern of deception that had characterized Ryan's criminal behavior. I agreed to participate in whatever proceedings might be necessary, recognizing that my involvement could help ensure that justice was served while potentially providing financial compensation for the suffering I'd endured. After completing the legal interview, Marcus and I drove through Burlington to observe the changes that had occurred during my 3-year absence. The town looked smaller and more provincial than I remembered, lacking the energy and sophistication that had become familiar during my years in Denver's dynamic business environment. The elementary school where I'd taught appeared tired and underfunded, a stark contrast to the luxury properties and exclusive venues that had become my professional environment. We drove past the house where Ryan and I had lived, noting that it appeared to be vacant with overgrown landscaping and accumulated mail, suggesting that the current financial crisis had forced an abandonment of the property. The sight triggered a complex mix of emotions, from sympathy for the neighbors who were dealing with the disruption of a criminal investigation, to satisfaction that the man who had abandoned me was experiencing consequences for his choices. Most significantly, we visited the gas station on Route 89, where everything had changed 3 years earlier. Frank was still working there, and his face lit up with genuine pleasure when he recognized me walking through the door. The years had been kind to him, and he expressed pride in hearing about my success through the local news coverage of my business achievements that had occasionally mentioned my Vermont origins. Frank introduced me to his wife, Helen, who had driven to the station specifically to meet the woman whose story had inspired her husband's frequent observations about the resilience of the human spirit. Helen was everything Frank had described. During our initial meeting, a woman whose kindness and wisdom had been shaped by decades of helping others navigate difficult circumstances. Their genuine happiness about my success provided emotional validation that money and professional achievements could never duplicate. The conversation with Frank and Helen reminded me of the profound impact that small acts of kindness could have on someone's life trajectory. Their willingness to help a stranded stranger during a blizzard had provided the emotional foundation that allowed me to rebuild my life from nothing. Without their compassion during my darkest moment, I might never have developed the confidence and resilience that became the cornerstone of my subsequent success. Marcus was charmed by Frank and Helen, appreciating their authentic warmth and down-to-earth perspectives that contrasted sharply with the sophisticated but sometimes superficial social environments that characterized our professional lives. He spent time discussing automotive maintenance with Frank, who was impressed by Marcus's knowledge of vintage vehicles and his respectful approach to learning from someone whose expertise came from decades of practical experience rather than formal education. The gas station visit became unexpectedly emotional when Frank revealed that he'd followed my career development through online articles and social media posts that mentioned my background. He'd shared updates with Helen, both of them taking pride in my achievements as if I were a member of their own family. Their investment in my success had been entirely selfless, motivated by genuine care for someone they'd helped during a crisis, rather than any expectation of future benefits or recognition. As we prepared to leave Vermont, I realized that the return visit had provided closure in ways I hadn't anticipated. Seeing the place where my old life had disintegrated while accompanied by the man who had become my partner in building something extraordinary created a powerful contrast that emphasized how completely my circumstances had changed. The woman who had been abandoned in a blizzard had become someone who could return triumphantly, not seeking revenge, but simply demonstrating the remarkable transformation that was possible when someone refused to accept limitations imposed by others. Marcus proposed marriage that evening in our suite at the Equinox Resort, presenting a vintage emerald ring that had belonged to his grandmother, and expressing his desire to formalize the partnership that had already transformed both our personal and professional lives. His proposal was characteristically thoughtful, emphasizing our shared values and compatible ambitions while acknowledging the emotional significance of taking this step in the place where my previous marriage had been destroyed. I accepted his proposal with the confidence of someone who had learned to recognize authentic love and mutual respect, understanding that our relationship was built on foundations entirely different from the insecure attachment that had characterized my marriage to Ryan. Marcus valued my capabilities, supported my ambitions, and offered partnership rather than expecting subordination. The contrast with my previous relationship couldn't have been more complete. The engagement ring sparkled in the lamplight as we discussed our future plans, including the Vermont expansion that would allow us to establish a presence in the market where my transformation had begun. The irony of returning to Vermont as a successful entrepreneur engaged to an extraordinary man was not lost on either of us, but our focus remained on the business opportunities rather than any desire for personal vindication. Our final morning in Vermont included a drive past Patricia Caldwell's house, where we observed evidence of the upheaval that Ryan's arrest had created for his family. The property appeared to be in the process of being sold, with a realtor's sign prominently displayed and moving trucks in the driveway suggesting a hasty departure. The site provided additional confirmation that the consequences of Ryan's criminal behavior were affecting everyone who had been complicit in his deceptive schemes. The flight back to Denver marked the end of a chapter that had begun with abandonment and humiliation, but concluded with engagement and triumph. The woman who returned to Colorado was the same person who had built a luxury experiences empire from nothing, but she now carried the additional confidence that came from confronting her past and discovering that she had not only survived, but thrived beyond anything her former life could have provided. 6 months after our engagement, Marcus and I returned to Vermont to establish the New England division of our luxury experiences empire. The timing was perfect, coinciding with the peak summer season when wealthy families descended upon their mountain estates and exclusive resorts throughout the region. We'd spent the winter developing relationships with high-end properties from Stowe to the Hamptons, creating a network of partners who understood our standards and shared our commitment to delivering extraordinary experiences. Our base of operations was a restored 19th-century mansion in Manchester that we'd purchased and converted into a showplace for potential clients. The property featured period architecture enhanced with modern amenities, creating an atmosphere that communicated both established tradition and contemporary sophistication. The decision to buy rather than lease demonstrated our commitment to the Vermont market, while providing a venue where we could host intimate events that showcased our capabilities. The mansion's grand opening reception attracted over 200 guests, including celebrities with Vermont homes, successful entrepreneurs who valued our discretion, and old money families whose influence extended throughout New England's social circles. The event featured locally sourced cuisine prepared by James Beard award-winning chefs, entertainment by musicians from the Vermont Symphony Orchestra, and carefully curated details that celebrated the region's natural beauty while demonstrating our ability to create sophisticated experiences. Marcus had hired James Fletcher as our dedicated driver and security coordinator, a former military professional whose background included executive protection services for high-profile individuals. James drove a fleet of luxury vehicles that could accommodate any transportation need, from intimate airport transfers to large group expeditions. His presence added an element of professional competence that reassured clients accustomed to working with service providers who understood the importance of confidentiality and personal safety. The centerpiece of our transportation fleet was an emerald green Lamborghini Huracan that Marcus had selected specifically for its dramatic visual impact and exceptional performance capabilities. The vehicle served both practical and marketing purposes, providing thrilling experiences for automotive enthusiasts while generating conversation and recognition that enhanced our brand visibility. James had received specialized training in A's high-performance vehicle operation, allowing him to offer professional racing experiences on private tracks throughout the region. Our first major Vermont project involved coordinating a multi-generational family reunion for a pharmaceutical fortune that required accommodating 60 relatives with varying interests and physical capabilities. The week-long celebration included private museum tours, exclusive shopping experiences, adventure activities for younger family members, and cultural events that appealed to older generations. The complexity of managing diverse preferences while maintaining family harmony tested every skill we'd developed during our Colorado years. The project's success generated immediate referrals within Vermont's interconnected wealthy families, leading to additional bookings that established our reputation as the premier luxury experiences provider in the region. Our approach differed from traditional event planners by focusing on authentic local experiences elevated to luxury standards, rather than importing generic high-end services that could be replicated anywhere. This philosophy resonated with clients who valued exclusivity and were willing to pay premium prices for access to unique opportunities. Marcus and I had developed a comfortable routine that balanced our professional responsibilities with personal time for exploring Vermont's hidden gems and building relationships within local communities. We discovered artisan producers whose products could enhance our events, identified venues that weren't available through traditional booking channels, and cultivated friendships with local experts who could provide insider access to experiences that money alone couldn't purchase. The investigation of Ryan's insurance fraud had progressed to trial preparation, with prosecutors expressing confidence that the evidence would support convictions on multiple felony charges. David Chen kept me informed about developments in the case, including plea negotiations that Ryan's attorneys had initiated in hopes of reducing potential prison sentences. Vanessa Sterling had already accepted a plea agreement that included substantial restitution payments and a prison term that would effectively end her real estate development career. Patricia Caldwell had been charged as an accessory to fraud, based on evidence that she'd knowingly received money that her son had obtained through criminal activities. Her attempts to claim ignorance of Ryan's illegal behavior were undermined by bank records, showing suspicious cash deposits and luxury purchases that exceeded what her legitimate income could support. The family's social standing in Burlington had been completely destroyed, with former friends distancing themselves to avoid association with the scandal. The legal proceedings had attracted significant media attention throughout Vermont, not only because of the substantial amounts involved, but also because the case highlighted vulnerabilities in insurance industry oversight that had allowed the fraud to continue undetected for so long. Editorial coverage in state newspapers had praised law enforcement agencies for their thorough investigation, while criticizing regulatory bodies that had failed to identify obvious red flags in Ryan's claims processing patterns. My role in the prosecution had been largely completed through depositions and evidence review, but the district attorney's office had requested that I remain available for potential testimony during the trial itself. The prospect of facing Ryan in court was both appealing and daunting, representing an opportunity to confront the man who had abandoned me while contributing to the justice process that would hold him accountable for his crimes. Marcus suggested that we should plan our summer schedule to ensure availability for court appearances, while maintaining our commitments to clients who had booked experiences during Vermont's peak season. The challenge of balancing legal obligations with business responsibilities was complicated by the unpredictable nature of trial scheduling, but our established operational systems allowed us to maintain service quality even when I might be occupied with court proceedings. The call that Ryan's trial was scheduled to begin came during a particularly busy week when we were coordinating 3 simultaneous events for clients whose social calendars couldn't accommodate delays or modifications. Marcus immediately adjusted our staffing arrangements to ensure that I could attend court sessions without compromising our service delivery, demonstrating the operational flexibility that had become one of our competitive advantages. The trial was held in the Chittenden County Courthouse in Burlington, an imposing granite building that projected the authority and permanence of the justice system. Media coverage was extensive, with reporters from throughout Vermont and neighboring states covering proceedings that involved millions of dollars in fraudulent claims and highlighted systematic failures in insurance industry oversight. I arrived at the courthouse in the Lamborghini driven by James, a deliberate choice designed to demonstrate my transformed circumstances to anyone who might observe my appearance. The vehicle attracted considerable attention in the courthouse parking area, where most attendees arrived in modest family sedans or pickup trucks typical of Vermont's practical transportation culture. The contrast was exactly what I'd intended, a visual representation of the success I'd achieved since leaving Burlington 3 years earlier. Ryan appeared diminished by his circumstances, wearing an ill-fitting suit that suggested financial constraints, and carrying himself with the defeated posture of someone whose world had collapsed completely. His hair had begun thinning. His face showed the stress lines that came from months of legal uncertainty, and his general appearance reflected the toll that criminal proceedings and public humiliation had taken on his physical and emotional well-being. Vanessa Sterling was present for the trial, despite having already accepted her plea agreement. Her presence required to testify about the scope of the criminal conspiracy and her role in coordinating fraudulent claim submissions. She appeared, older than her actual age, with the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who had sacrificed her professional reputation and personal relationships for financial gain that ultimately proved both temporary and catastrophic. Patricia Caldwell sat in the gallery behind her son, her usual imperious demeanor replaced by the anxious uncertainty of someone whose social position had been irrevocably damaged by association with criminal behavior. Her attempts to maintain dignity were undermined by the obvious strain of public disgrace and the prospect of her own criminal prosecution for accessory charges related to her knowing receipt of fraudulent proceeds. The prosecution's presentation was methodical and devastating, documenting the systematic nature of Ryan's criminal activities and the substantial harm caused to insurance companies and legitimate policyholders whose premiums had increased to compensate for fraudulent payouts. Expert witnesses explained the sophisticated techniques that Ryan and his accomplices had used to avoid detection, while processing false claims that totaled nearly $500,000 over 2 years. My testimony focused on Ryan's behavior during our marriage, particularly the lies he'd told about his work requirements and the secretive financial activities that I'd attributed to legitimate business pressures. The prosecutor used my account to establish the timeline of criminal behavior and demonstrate the pattern of deception that had characterized Ryan's actions, both professionally and personally. During cross-examination, Ryan's defense attorney attempted to suggest that I might have been aware of his criminal activities and chosen to ignore them for financial benefit. The strategy backfired when I was able to provide detailed documentation of my modest teacher's salary and the separate financial accounts that demonstrated my complete independence from any fraudulent proceeds. The attorney's aggressive questioning only emphasized the contrast between my honest financial situation and Ryan's criminal behavior. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when Ryan took the stand in his own defense, attempting to minimize his role in the conspiracy while blaming Vanessa and other accomplices for initiating the criminal scheme. His testimony revealed a weak character that shifted responsibility for his choices while showing no genuine remorse for the harm he'd caused to insurance companies, colleagues, or family members who had trusted him. During a recess in the proceedings, I encountered Ryan in the courthouse hallway, where he was conferring with his attorney about plea negotiations that prosecutors had rejected as inadequate. When he noticed me approaching, his expression shifted from legal anxiety to something approaching panic as he processed the implications of my transformed appearance and obvious success. The conversation was brief, but profoundly satisfying. Ryan expressed surprise at seeing me in Vermont, apparently unaware that I'd been cooperating with the investigation that had led to his prosecution. When he asked about my circumstances, I simply mentioned that I was in town on business, managing luxury experiences for clients throughout New England. His attempts to appear casual were undermined by his obvious distress at discovering that the woman he'd abandoned had not only survived but achieved remarkable success. The courthouse encounter continued when Patricia approached me during the lunch break, her usual condescending manner replaced by desperate attempts to engage my sympathy for her family's circumstances. She mentioned Ryan's financial difficulties, the legal expenses that were consuming their remaining assets, and the social ostracism they were experiencing from former friends who wanted no association with the scandal. Her attempts at manipulation were transparent and pathetic, representing a complete reversal of the power dynamic that had characterized our previous interactions. The woman who had once dismissed me as inadequate for her son was now seeking assistance from someone whose success highlighted the massive error in judgment that had led to her family's destruction. I listened politely, but offered no comfort or assistance, recognizing that her current difficulties were direct consequences of choices she'd made and values she'd embraced. The trial concluded with guilty verdicts on all major charges, resulting in a 5-year prison sentence for Ryan and substantial restitution requirements that would consume any assets he might ever accumulate. Vanessa received a 3-year sentence under her plea agreement, while Patricia was sentenced to 18 months for accessory charges. The judge's sentencing comments emphasized the systematic nature of their criminal behavior and the breach of public trust that insurance fraud represented. Outside the courthouse after sentencing, I was approached by several reporters who had covered the trial and were interested in my perspective as Ryan's former wife and a key prosecution witness. I provided brief comments about the importance of accountability for white-collar crime while declining to discuss personal details about my marriage or current circumstances. The media attention was handled professionally, maintaining the discretion that our luxury clients valued while contributing to public understanding of insurance fraud consequences. The most unexpected encounter of the day came when I was walking to the Lamborghini after the court proceedings concluded. Ryan was being released on bond pending the beginning of his prison sentence, and he appeared to be struggling with transportation arrangements since his driving privileges had been suspended, and his family's vehicles had been seized as proceeds of criminal activity. I found myself in the surreal position of observing my former husband attempting to call a taxi from the courthouse steps while I prepared to depart in a $250,000 supercar driven by a professional chauffeur. The contrast was so complete that it seemed almost fictional, representing a complete reversal of circumstances that could have been scripted for maximum dramatic impact. James opened the Lamborghini's door for me with the professional courtesy that characterized all his interactions, and I settled into the leather seat while Ryan continued his phone conversations about transportation alternatives. As we prepared to depart, I made eye contact with him through the vehicle's window, offering a polite nod that acknowledged his presence without suggesting any personal connection or sympathy for his circumstances. The drive away from the courthouse felt like the final chapter in a story that had begun with abandonment and humiliation, but concluded with vindication and triumph. The woman who had been left stranded in a blizzard 3.5 years earlier was departing Burlington in luxury transportation that exceeded anything she could have imagined during her darkest moments. The transformation was complete, not just in material circumstances, but in the confidence and self-respect that came from building success through authentic effort rather than deception. Marcus was waiting at our Manchester mansion when James delivered me from the courthouse, having monitored trial coverage through online news sources and legal databases that provided real-time updates about proceedings. His concern was primarily about my emotional well-being, rather than the trial outcome, which had been virtually guaranteed by the overwhelming evidence that prosecutors had assembled against Ryan and his accomplices. We celebrated that evening with a quiet dinner prepared by our personal chef, discussing the business implications of having the legal proceedings concluded while reflecting on the personal significance of achieving such complete vindication. The trial had provided closure in ways that simple success could never accomplish, demonstrating not only that I had thrived after being discarded, but that the people who had betrayed me had ultimately destroyed themselves through their own poor choices and moral failures. The following months brought continued growth in our Vermont operations, with referrals generating bookings that extended our presence throughout New England and into select markets in the Mid-Atlantic region. The publicity surrounding the insurance fraud trial had created unexpected name recognition that enhanced our credibility with potential clients who valued working with service providers whose integrity had been publicly validated through legal proceedings. Marcus and I married the following autumn in a ceremony held at our Manchester mansion, surrounded by clients who had become friends and local vendors who had contributed to our business success. The event showcased our ability to create extraordinary experiences while celebrating the partnership that had transformed both our personal and professional lives. Frank and Helen were honored guests, representing the kindness and wisdom that had sustained me during my darkest period and inspired the resilience that became the foundation of everything I built afterward. The wedding received coverage in several luxury lifestyle publications, not because of celebrity attendance or extravagant expenditures, but because of the authentic story it represented about rebuilding life after betrayal and creating success through genuine partnership and shared values. The articles emphasized our business philosophy of delivering authentic luxury experiences while highlighting the personal journey that had led to our professional collaboration. Our honeymoon was a working trip through European markets where we researched expansion opportunities and studied luxury hospitality models that might be adapted to American clients seeking authentic cultural experiences. The combination of business development and personal celebration reflected our integrated approach to life and work, where professional success and personal fulfillment reinforced each other rather than competing for priority. Returning to Vermont, after our European honeymoon, I drove past the gas station on Route 89 where everything had changed 4 years earlier. Frank waved from behind the counter as he had on my previous visits, but this time I was returning not as someone seeking closure, but as someone who had found genuine happiness and authentic success. The woman who had been abandoned in a blizzard had become someone who created extraordinary experiences for others while building a life that exceeded anything she could have imagined during her Vermont years. The final encounter with my former life came unexpectedly 6 months after our wedding, when I learned through David Chen that Ryan had begun serving his prison sentence at a minimum security facility in southern Vermont. His attempts to appeal his conviction had been unsuccessful, and his early release prospects were limited by the substantial restitution requirements that he would need to satisfy before completing his sentence. Patricia had completed her prison term, but remained under supervised probation that restricted her ability to leave Vermont or engage in financial activities without court approval. Her former social connections had been permanently severed, leaving her isolated in a community where her family's criminal behavior had become synonymous with betrayal and greed. The woman who had once dismissed me as inadequate had become someone whose own inadequacies had been publicly exposed through criminal proceedings. Vanessa Sterling had been released from prison but faced professional licensing revocation that would prevent her from working in real estate development for the remainder of her career. Her attempts to rebuild her reputation had been unsuccessful, with former clients and business partners unwilling to risk association with someone whose criminal behavior had been so thoroughly documented. The stronger choice that had seemed so attractive to Ryan had proven to be the catalyst for both their destruction. The knowledge of their circumstances provided satisfaction without requiring any personal involvement or vindictive behavior on my part. Justice had been served through legal proceedings, consequences had been imposed by appropriate authorities, and their current difficulties were direct results of choices they had made rather than circumstances imposed by others. My role had been limited to cooperation with law enforcement and testimony about factual matters, avoiding any appearance of personal vendetta or inappropriate satisfaction with their misfortune. Standing in the garden of our Manchester mansion on a crisp October evening 4 years after the blizzard that had changed everything, I reflected on the journey that had transformed a stranded teacher into a successful entrepreneur, married to an extraordinary partner. The woman who had been abandoned because she wasn't strong enough or good enough had built something remarkable through authentic effort, genuine relationships, and unwavering commitment to personal growth and professional excellence. The betrayal, that had once seemed like the end of everything, had actually been the beginning of a life that exceeded every aspiration I'd possessed during my Vermont years. Ryan's abandonment had forced me to discover capabilities I'd never known I possessed, while his criminal behavior had ultimately provided vindication that went beyond simple personal success. The people who had dismissed my worth had proven their own unworthiness through choices that destroyed everything they'd schemed to achieve. Marcus joined me in the garden as the sun set behind the mountains, carrying champagne to toast another successful day in a life we'd built together through mutual respect, shared ambitions, and genuine appreciation for each other's capabilities. The contrast with my previous relationship could not have been more complete, representing the difference between authentic partnership and superficial attraction, between building something meaningful and simply pursuing immediate advantages. As we raised our glasses to celebrate another perfect autumn evening in Vermont, I thought about Frank's wisdom during that first terrible night, when he'd predicted that sometimes the worst things that happened became catalysts for the best things that followed. The blizzard that had seemed like pure cruelty had actually been the storm that cleared away illusions and created space for authentic happiness to grow. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.